بنا نلقاه في يومنا يا سادتي يا كرام سيروا لنيل المنى للخير هيا بنا نلقاه في يومنا يا سادتي يا كرام سيروا لنيل المنى سيروا لنيل المنى.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه الطيبين الطاهرين. We start with the name of Allah. We praise and thank Allah for all of the endowments He bestowed upon us, without Allah, the exalted, being obligated to give anything. And we ask Allah to raise the rank, to protect, to raise the rank of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, to protect his nation from what he feared for it. Thereafter, previously we mentioned the integrals of wudu. And inshallah, I'll mention for you some additional benefits that it is befitting to be mentioned in this section. Among those matters is that as for the filth that is underneath the nail of the person, some scholars did not consider this overlooked. They considered that it must be cleaned and water must reach what's under there for the validity of the wudu. And some scholars considered that this is overlooked. So if there was some filth underneath the nail, then it would not be an obligation for one to remove it all for the validity of one's wudu. Likewise, if a person had cracks in their skin, then it would be necessary to make sure that the water reach those cracks in the skin. As for if there was something like a thorn or a splinter that was in someone's skin, then if this splinter was apparent, that is, it hadn't fully penetrated the skin to the extent where it became concealed, no, it was apparent, then it would be obligatory to remove that splinter that splinter or that thorn, and to make the water reach the crack in it, the hole in it where it was. However, if the splinter totally penetrated the skin to the point where it was concealed, then it would not at that point be obligatory for one to remove it and make sure that the water reached the crack of it. Rather, they could just wash what was apparent. Furthermore, if a person had a wound and that wound, it had a scab over it, then it would be sufficient to wash over the scab, and they would not have to remove the scab and wash what was underneath the scab. These are some beneficial matters that are useful for one to know when it among what pertains to the wudu. After mentioning the obligations of wudu, the author, may Allah the Exalted have mercy on him, he started to talk about the invalidators of wudu. And the invalidators of wudu are only four things. There are four matters only. That is, the way that the scholars worded it and explained it, they can break it down into four issues. When you really look at it, some of these issues, one of them would include numerous different things. But they would use, the scholars, they made it easy for us by using terminology, using expressions that would encompass all of the sought meanings and exclude any unintended meaning. And so they summarize all of the invalidators of wudu into four matters. And nothing outside of these four matters invalidates wudu. So one would be mindful to pay close attention to what these issues are. And if one memorized these issues, then it would be highly beneficial for one when they need to recall the invalidators of wudu, whether it was for themselves or for teaching others. Because some of these matters, it would be numerous, many possible things that could all be categorized in one expression. And it could be all summarized in one expression as it will become clear, God willing. The first among the matters that invalidate the wudu is anything that comes out of the eliminatory outlets. And the eliminatory outlets are the penis, anus, and vagina. The anus and the place where urine comes out. The penis, anus, and vagina. These are the eliminatory outlets. That is anything that is liquid, solid, or gas that comes out of the eliminatory outlets invalidates wudu except one thing, and that is mani. That is the spermatic fluid or the ejaculatory fluid. According to the madhab of Imam al-Shafi'i, may Allah the Exalted have mercy on him, this alone does not invalidate wudu. For one to emit their mani, their ejaculated fluid, it does not invalidate wudu on its own. So if there was a scenario in which a person would ejaculate without doing any of the invalidators of wudu, then technically they would need to make a ghusl to pray, but they would not have invalidated their wudu if they were on wudu. Is in the order that the Sheikh mentioned here, is for one to touch the private part of a human with the inside part of the bare hand. So here we mean the private part of a human. So this would be the penis, not the testicles. The anus, which is the area that comes together around where the filth exits. Yani that immediate area that comes together and closes, comes together where the filth exits out. Not the buttocks, or what they call the butt cheeks, for example. For one to touch this, even with the inside part of their bare hand, does not invalidate one's wudu. And likewise, the vagina of the woman, this is the part of her body that if it's touched with the inside part of the bare hand, it invalidates one's wudu. So one thinks about all of what was mentioned, touching the private part of a human. So if one touched the private part of other than a human, like an animal, a wild animal, a domesticated animal, for example, even if it was with the inside part of the bare hand, then one does not invalidate their wudu. The author said, touching the private part of a human with the inside part of the bare hand. So if a person touched their own genitalia with the inside part of the bare hand, or the genitalia of any other human, whether they were a relative or not, they break their wudu. But if they touched their own genitalia with the backhand side only, they do not break their wudu. Or if they touch their own genitalia or the genitalia of another person with the edge of the fingers here, or the very front of the tip of the finger here, then this also would not be the reason for one to break one's wudu. And when we say that touching the private part of a human with the inside part of the bare hand, we mean the part of the hand that is not seen. If you put your hands together like this, you separate the fingers a little, and you apply a little bit of pressure. Then what you don't see in this scenario is the inside part of the hand and what pertains to the forefingers and the palm. The palm is what's between the fingers and the wrist. So for the forefingers and the palm, this, what you don't see in this scenario, is the inside part of the bare hand. So if one touched his own private part or the private part of another human with what is other than the inside part of the bare hand, then that touching, yani touching the private part, would not be the reason for one to invalidate one's prayer. And as we said, this applies to oneself or even one's own non-marriageable relatives, meaning that if one touched their own private part with the inside part of the bare hand, they break their wudu. Or even if they touched their own non-marriageable relatives' private part with the inside part of the bare hand, they would break their wudu. So if, for example, a person had a baby and they washed their own child after that child, soiled themselves, and because of, or in that washing, the inside part of their bare hand came in direct contact, skin to skin contact with the private part of that child, even if it was their own child, still the wudu would be broken. As for the thumb, this part that you don't see when you put the thumb in this position is what's considered the inside part of the thumb. All right, not this edge of the thumb, all right, that you wouldn't see when you put when you put both hands together. That's more of the side of the thumb. The inside part of the thumb is the part that is not seen when you put the fingers in this position. And we said that this invalidates one's prayer if it is with the bare hand, meaning that there is skin-to-skin contact. Skin-to-skin contact between the inside part of the hand and the private part of a human, any human. So if the individual was wearing gloves, or he was, or he had a rag in his hand and he touched the private part with the rag, preventing skin-to-skin contact, then the wudu would not be invalidated. The third matter that invalidates wudu is for the marriageable man to touch, for the man to touch the marriageable woman skin to skin, while both that man and woman had reached a state at which they are normally desired. So this means that if a man who has reached a state which he is normally desired, meaning he's reached a state of physical development where people with a sound nature and a healthy, normal disposition would find them desirable for marriage. If a man who reached this state had skin-to-skin contact, his skin touching her skin, with a woman who was marriageable, meaning not his mahram, not a non-marriageable relative, a woman who he's prohibited from marrying in any scenario forever. Rather, a woman who is not his mahram. If he touched a woman who is not mahram for him, a marriageable woman, skin to skin, and that woman had also reached a state at which she is normally desired. She had also reached a state of physical development where she is considered desirable for marriage by people who have a sound nature and a healthy, sound disposition. If two people like this, a man and a woman, they had skin-to-skin contact, then both of their wudu would be broken. Thus, if it was not skin-to-skin contact, then it does not break the wudu. But of course, it's not permissible for a man to touch a woman who's not his wife or female slave with desire, even if it was through clothing, even if it was with a barrier. So if it was not skin-to-skin contact, it doesn't break the wudu. This also means that if he touched her hair or she touched his hair only, and there was no skin-to-skin contact, rather it was skin-to-hair contact, the wudu would not be broken. Likewise, if only the nail was touched, this is not skin, so it does not break one's wudu. Or if only the tooth was touched, then this is not skin, so it does not break the wudu. Rather, what breaks the wudu is the skin-to-skin contact of two marriageable people who both reached a state at which they're normally desired. Thus, if a man touched a woman who was mahram for him, a woman who was non-marriageable for him, it's not permissible for him to marry her ever in any circumstance, then he would not break his wudu. Like for a man to touch the skin of his own mother, or his own sister, or his own daughter, or his own aunt, or his own niece. These are among the women that are mahram for a man. He could never marry them under any circumstance. So if he touched those women skin to skin, and of course we're not talking about the private part, rather he touched them skin to skin on another part of their body other than the private part, then and they had both reached a state at which, if he touched them skin to skin, then he would not break their wudu, whether they were young or old, because they are his mahram, they are his non-marriageable relative. Likewise, if a man and a man had skin-to-skin contact, or a woman and a woman had skin-to-skin contact, this does not break the wudu because this is not considered marriageable. And if one of the two parties or both had not reached a state of physical development at which they are considered normally desired by the people of a sound nature, then this would also not break one's wudu. So if a man, for example, touched the skin, shook the hand of a small child, or gave a baby a kiss on the cheek, or a toddler or an infant, then this would not break one's wudu. This would not break one's wudu because that child has not reached a state at which they are normally desired. And there are other examples of mahram as well, those people who one could not marry. An example is there are other reasons why a person would be considered mahram for one, like some of them are due to marriage and some of them are due to nursing. So if, for example, a woman nursed a child to the enough time so that child was considered that woman's nursing child, then that child, when he grew up, then if he had skin-to-skin contact with that woman, then he would not break his wudu. And the fourth and final invalidator of wudu is losing consciousness. And losing consciousness happens different ways. One is by falling asleep. Another is by fainting. Another is by losing sanity. So if a person lost consciousness, they fell asleep completely, or they fainted or lost sanity, then their wudu would be invalidated. When they regained consciousness, when they woke back up, they would be obligated to reperform their wudu to renew their ablution before they would be allowed to pray, except the one who slept with their buttocks firmly planted. So if a person made wudu and then they sat down, not that they laid down, not on their back, not on their side, not on their stomach, even if they claimed that they were laying in a way that they considered themselves firmly planted, still, if they fell asleep while laying, their wudu would be invalidated. So if a person sat down, however, and they were firmly seated on their buttocks in a way that they had certainty that nothing would exit from their rear end, from their buttocks, from their anus, and when they awoke, they had not changed positions at all. Rather, they were still firmly seated, firmly planted. Then, if they fell asleep on wudu, they would still consider themselves on wudu, so they would be allowed to stand and perform the prayer without renewing it. If they were not seated and they fell asleep, then their wudu would still be invalidated. If they were seated, but they didn't fall asleep, rather they fainted or lost sanity, then their wudu would be invalidated. If they fell asleep and they were seated, but not firmly planted on their rear end in a way that secured them from anything exiting, then they would consider that their wudu was invalidated. But when we say that he slept, it doesn't mean like that level of dozing off, where a person still hears that which is going on in his environment. This is not the sleep that is counted as an invalidator of wudu. So if a person was sleepy, he was very tired or exhausted, and he began to doze off, and he began to become na'is, and he was dozing off, but he didn't actually sleep. Rather, he could still hear what was going on in his environment in that state. Then he would not have invalidated his wudu because he didn't go all the way to sleep. One of the signs of sleep is for a person to have a dream. So if a person dozed off and then he had a dream, then he actually did sleep. And so if he was not firmly planted on his rear end, seated in a way where he was secure from anything exiting, then he would have to renew his wudu. And with that, we have completed mentioning the invalidators of wudu. I hope that it was clear for you, insha'Allah ta'ala. May Allah the Exalted guide us to the acceptable deeds. Walhamdulillah wa sallallahu ala sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa ashabihi at-tayyibin at-tahirin. La ilaha
قلوبنا هامت بذكر الله 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 قلوبنا هامت بذكر الله 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 قلوبنا هامت بذكر الله 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 قلوبنا الله
ويسر لنا سبيل الرشاد وجود بالهنا.
فؤادي اغتنى